So Dave, I'm gonna work to make you a presenter so that you can share your screen, and we'll record your presentation so that we can put it online later. So let me find you in the attendee list. Okay.
Hey, does that show up then?
It does, yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about a couple of the benefits that we've recognized from the Monarch CCAA. This came in kind of a conversation that Dan and I had when we were talking about some issues as far as completing our annual monitoring. And I talked about the fact that we had recognized these benefits in a couple of different applications, and one that we're currently working on. And he felt like this would be a good case study. So once again, I appreciate the opportunity, because this is a fairly unique situation, and I hate to use the word groundbreaking, but it literally is groundbreaking as I get involved in this. So, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions, and I have a small ask of the group at the end of the presentation. So we have, Hoosier Energy has a large network in southern Indiana, which is very rural. There's a large sector of Hoosier National Forest, and we've had an operating agreement there since 1967. In 2017, we re-executed the permit for right-of-way management with a sunset date of 2046. The problem with that particular permit is that we were only approved for conventional mowing, not conservation mowing, but conventional mowing. And if you've ever been to southern Indiana, you realize there's a great deal of very steep slopes. It's very rough terrain down there. So mowing is very expensive, and it's a very unsafe type of process that we have to go through. But that was the cards that we were dealt. The one thing that was pretty interesting is when they revised the O&M in 2017, they threw in language, and I don't think that they understood the implications of throwing in the language that IVM must be used to the greatest extent possible. And as we all know, that conventional mowing is not a process of IVM. So we started looking into what are our options. Well, we've implemented IVM, and I've thankfully got my vegetation management coordinator, Jared Murphy, on this call as well. So Jared, if I misspeak, please jump in and correct me. But we implemented an IVM in 2016 or 2017, somewhere in that neighborhood, and this was the only portion of our network which is the greatest extent is we were not possible to implement those types of processes. So as I mentioned before, mowing was expensive, difficult, and non-selective due to our cycle of vegetation management. We have 4 basic units that we run through a cyclical process for vegetation management. Our approved management protocol did not allow us to enroll that in the CCAA. So there's roughly 300 acres. Some of it has an easement, which we are able to use herbicides, but there was 160 acres managed under the permit. And the one thing is, this particular habitat is perfectly suited, or this particular right-of-way is perfectly suited for habitat development. And that depiction there just kind of gives you a representative of the corridors in which we're talking about. So what was the solution? Well, Jared took the initiative to complete one of your government standardized forms, the Form 299, which is a request for revision of the operating and manual operation and maintenance procedures. And we thought, well, after we joined the CCAA, we had originally started talking to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, about permit modification. Our contact at the time, and this is pretty crucial, our contact at the time was not that motivated to revise the permit, but did stick in the language of the IVM, which helped us considerably. Our original discussions involved the preparation of an EA or an EIS, and everybody knows just the cost and the length of that process, and how almost ridiculous it is to get involved in something like that. And we wanted to avoid that at all costs, because the ROI would just not make sense on doing either an EA or an EIS for this particular purpose. The one thing is the Forest Service fully supported the proposal. They were so excited. The botany group was absolutely excited about the potential. But the problem is once again, the federal government is, dreadfully understaffed, and they were concerned that it was going to take them a 2 to 3 year time frame to complete an assessment. That was just due to projects that were on their plate at the current time and the process itself. About a year ago, we had a new contact, Evie Phelps, that came on board with the Forest Service. And once Jared started speaking about this again, that's when that Form 299 came out, because Evie was a great advocate for us to work with. And she was committed to finding a way to make this work. Now, how did that happen? Well, fortunately, she had some experience with categorical exclusions, and this particular categorical exclusion was added to the Forest Service not too long ago. Not to mention the fact, and this was an interesting development I learned in conversations with Evie, the Forest Service now has the capability to use categorical exclusions from other federal agencies as well. So, having said that, if we dig into those, we possibly could find an application for situations in which we can use categorical exclusion. The one thing is, we stepped up and we said, okay, well, if you don't have the staffing, Hoosier can pay for and work with a consultant, and thankfully we have a great relationship with Stantec. We'll do the NEPA assessment for this particular process. At that point, Evie found this obscure categorical exclusion, which had to be approved by Washington, D.C., their federal office, and was particular to a acreage amount, that 2,800 acres. The one interesting thing, Washington, D.C. came back with 2 basic comments during their consultation period with our regional office. The first one was on herbicide usage. What herbicides will they be using? Well, upon review of that, it was directly in line with what the Forest Service was already using for right-of-way management. So that was kind of a no-brainer. But there were also a lot of new personnel in the hierarchy of the Forest Service that were not familiar with this particular process, the CCAA, habitat development, or let alone the use of categorical exclusion. So there was some pushback. The second question that came back was, how is this a collaborative effort? Because it specifically says here in the categorical exclusion that projects shall be developed or refined through a collaborative process that includes multiple interested persons representing diverse interests. And vegetating, thinning, and timber harvesting activities shall be designed to achieve ecological restoration objectives. The CCAA fit this perfectly. And once that was brought into the equation, everybody bought off on this very quickly. This was only the second time in the history of the Forest Service that this particular categorical exclusion could be applied to a particular process. And the CADEX would not have been available to us if we were not associated with the CCAA. So during that portion of the process, the identification, they identified exactly what we needed to do for the permit revisit. Of course, you have the purpose and need statement. That was pretty well defined. Not an obstacle for us. There's a Section 7 review or endangered species. The Forest Service offered to do that because of their particular expertise of their area and the expertise that they have on staff. The one thing that we took on was the Section 106, the cultural and archaeological resources, as well as the water quality and wetland certifications. Other things that were added into this NEPA process that are not typically what we see are national recreation area reviews, which is required by the Forest Service, wild and scenic rivers reviews, and a wilderness study area. Those are going to be completed by the U.S. Fish and Forest Service. The completion of this report will require a record of decision by the U.S. Forest Service. That is just specifically written into the federal regulations. So now we're deep into the process, right? This is where the red tape comes out. The one obstacle that we ran into is the proposal by our consultant required assessment, which was approximately $174,000. Almost $100,000 of that was based upon the archaeological shovel testing alone, which was very labor intensive. Over 160 acres, they were recommending almost 3,000 shovel tests according to standard practices. We were able to bring that down about 15% by taking out those areas of the right-of-way which were greater than 20 degrees in slope. And then also the Forest Service is working on areas that were previously surveyed. Where we're at now is in negotiations with what is the true value of doing the shovel test, which is by far the greatest expense in the evaluation process, when what we're recommending results in absolutely no ground disturbance, but our previous or our current operating manual, operating process, does result in ground disturbance, and we never were asked to do any type of NEPA process for that original application. Now, bear in mind, let's go back. This was originally initiated in 1967 prior to the promulgation of the NEPA standards. So that may have been the case for that. But I think that we have the ability to challenge the Forest Service on saying, hey, what is the value of this data? This is an obstacle for us. As I'll show here in just a moment, the ROI still says that we're going to be on the plus side of things, but what's the value of this data? And this is the ask that I have of this group. If you have any experience in working with federal agencies on this type of process, saying exactly, okay, what is the value of this data if we're not going to be if the change in our processes will not result in ground disturbance, what is the value in gathering that data from doing the shovel tests? We're more than happy to do the walkthroughs. We'll do desktop reviews. We'll review all of the necessary information, but we just don't see the value in that. And that's the little bit of pushback. Our management is committed to this, but they recognize the ROI. We're going to go forward with it. We're just trying to make it a little bit better on the ROI, as I'll show you. So what we've recognized is a 20-year total savings of about $150,000, and that is figuring in the total cost of the NEPA preparation into the project itself. So there is a very good ROI associated with this, and as I mentioned before, we're going to move forward with it regardless, because it is the only section in which we do this conventional mowing, and we would like to just make that non-existent in our management procedures. So hopefully our ROI will increase based upon negotiations with the Forest Service. But it's been a very interesting process. I've learned a lot throughout this process, and I think it's going to make a huge difference because of the amount of support that we get from the Forest Service. It's something that they're doing already on the Forest Service property, and just as you were mentioning the grants, this is a project that we're totally committed to. And if we have the opportunity to go in and establish habitat from their conventional mowing, we had 2 fires on this right-of-way last year during the dry periods because of the management techniques in which we cannot control the woody brush as easily as we can with a hack and squirt type management process or just herbicide control in general. So not only do we have an issue with the process itself, but we also have a reliability issue with our customers from these fires on the right-of-way. Second portion of our recognized benefits, and once again, this involves the federal government and interaction with the federal government. We were in the process of doing an upgrade, a line rebuild in a very sensitive environment, which was almost 100% wetland called the Busser on Bottoms, just outside of Sullivan, Indiana. There's a 345 kV line replacement on adopted acres, of approximately 10 acres of adopted acres that was involved in this particular project. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Sullivan tornadoes that occurred in late March of 2023. Unfortunately, 2 individuals lost their lives. There was a tremendous amount of damage. That tornado stayed on the ground for 20, 30 miles. There were 2 individuals killed in McCormick's Creek State Park, which was in the path of this tornado. It came within 2 miles of my house. I kind of live in Tornado Alley, just not too far from here. But the issue not only was the community devastated, but also we lost about 5 or 6 structures of what we call the L200 345 kV line as well. This one was not planned for any type of scheduled replacement. It just happened to fall within the path of the tornado. So just a few photos from this particular tornado. There was an amazing amount of damage. We were just about done with the line, and you can see the matting here, you know, because we were working in basically completely saturated ground. And by the way, Stantec was fabulous on this particular project, from the initial as well as the follow-up and the storm restoration. And it also involved a bald eagle nest in which we had to have a protected area. That was the Busser on Bottoms. The 200 345 line, we lost several structures there too. We had to rapidly rebuild that line as well. It rolled this dump truck over about 5 or 6 times and crashed it into one of the poles. So it was a very, very, very destructive storm. So once the federal, since FEMA had designated this particular area of a federal disaster area, we were eligible for federal funding. We had approximately $4 million in repairs to both the Busser-on line as well as the L200. Our original meetings with FEMA outlined all the documentation needed for the application. And originally, our environmental representative that we were working with at FEMA was requiring a full NEPA review for a completed project. So we were looking at the 200 line, and we were thinking, we're going to have to go back and do a full NEPA assessment on this particular line, even though this was not a planned project. Well, after a little bit of discussion and a little bit of a deeper dive into it, we stated, hey, you know, since we're a co-op, a non-for-profit organization, almost all of our funding for these type of capital projects is run through RUS. So we're on the hook for a borrower's environmental report for almost every project that we do that results in land acquisition. Busser on Bottoms itself had an approved BER prior to commencement of the operation, but the 200 line was an emergency rebuild. During those negotiations, I brought up our involvement in the Monarch CCAA in the context of the ESA assessment, because they were very interested in the endangered species assessment in such a wildlife sensitive area. What I found very interesting is FEMA was not aware of this program. So I had the opportunity to educate everyone that was involved in this process about the Monarch CCAA. They were very impressed with not only our environmental stewardship, but our preparation prior to work. As a result, no further NEPA work was required, and only stormwater control and water quality certification was what we had to do for the completion of that particular project. So in conclusion, you know, we've realized a lot of benefits with the CCAA, but these were the most tangible that we've had within probably the last year and a half. It's opened a lot of doors for us. The U.S., you know, the Forest Service permit modification would not have been possible without the involvement. And we'd be stuck doing conventional mowing until 2046 had we not taken this step and Jared not looked into this and about keeping this in line with our IVM process. FEMA was very impressed with our commitment to the program, our stewardship to the environment, and we're thankful to learn more about the program themselves. It kind of changed the course of the conversation, if you will. Landowner interactions have improved dramatically upon learning about our involvement. We're actually constructing more T-lines this year than new T-lines that we've done for quite some time. It is absolutely critical to our new line builds because we can affirm to the landowner exactly what we're going to do in our restoration. And it is critical to our easements for herbicide use. A lot of those areas where we did not have herbicide use before are now open up to it based upon the information that we've been able to provide to them and some of the materials that we've created through our involvement in the CCAA. And the declaration of our involvement is now stated in every BER submitted to the RUS because the monarch continually comes up as a threatened or endangered species as part of the ESA assessment. So those are just a snapshot of the benefits that we've recognized. You know, I'd like to keep the group informed on how this process is going because there's several utilities behind us that operate in Indiana that are kind of in the queue for the same process. So if we can get through this, and even though your company may not be subject to the NEPA requirements on a routine basis like we are, you're going to see that when you go for a permit modification and start working with the Forest Service because they're obligated through federal law to do so. So I'd be happy to help in that process, but I would like to, if anybody's got any type of experience in working with the federal government on negotiating these 106 concerns that I have, please reach out to me because I'd love to hear your take on that. But once again, thank you for the opportunity. My contact information, I'd be more than happy to share additional information that's needed. But once again, thank you.